Hi, I'm Garry Meier.
And I'm Rokan.
And you're watching the Rabbi Doug Show because obviously your TV's broken and you can't get anything else.
Chicago's cable TV?
No, he's really good. Keep watching. It's got to be interesting.
That's what you think.
Well, I'm going out west down on the coast, where the California chicks are really the most. Well, they walk, I walk, and I walk, and they twist, I twist, and I twist, shimmy, 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 and they fly, and I fly, and I fly. Well, they're out there having some fun.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. Glad you could be with us today. My guest today is someone I've known for many years, and you've probably known him too, but not by face. Mr. Rick Kaempfer. How are you, Rick?
Nice to be here, Rabbi Doug.
Good to have you with me. Rick is the author, along with John Swanson, of the book, The Radio Producer's Handbook. And this book just about tells anything you need to know if you want to be a professional radio producer. Rick has been in the business for how many years now?
20 plus.
20 plus years. And I knew Rick before I was in TV. As a matter of fact, Rick is one of the people who sort of brought me into the broadcasting booths to begin with back in the days when I was a regular contributor to the Steve Dahl Show, which I'm an occasional contributor still, but long before I was on TV, Rick was Steve Dahl and Garry Meier's producer.
That's correct.
And we got to know each other and stayed in touch over the years. Not only did he call me and say, we want you to come on for this and that, but Rick went on after a few years with Steve and Garry to become producer extraordinaire for the amazing John Records Landecker. And how long were you with Mr. John Records Landecker?
For 10 years.
10 years.
Yes.
On WJMK.
WJMK, the oldie station.
The oldie station, once upon a time, Magic.
That's right. It was Magic, then it was oldies, then it was Magic, then it's old. I think it's oldies again.
Yeah.
Yes.
And until John's recent retirement from radio, which may be short-lived, who knows?
Well, he is doing some work now in WGN.
Right,
he's still in host, and occasionally I also will go in and work with him at GN.
Great,
which is a fun experience.
And I know. Last time I talked to him, he said he missed hosting a regular show every day of the week, and so he says, although I'm in semi-retirement, you never know what'll happen in the future.
That's true. He's getting a little antsy, I think.
Plus, he's doing TV, Channel 11 still.
He's the movie critic on Chicago Tonight with Bob Surratt.
And he does the Big Fat Nude Hippo show now and then.
He does.
And
you'll see him everywhere. He gets around.
Yeah, and I see him in the newspaper quoted all the time.
That's true, too.
So he's really moving. I know you guys are still really good friends.
Yes, he's a good friend of mine. I talk to him at least a couple times a week.
Wow, he's a great guy, and as he always says, John Records Landecker, that's my real name.
It is actually his middle name.
Yeah, and when John was on the show and we had a wonderful show with him here, it was Rick who put the whole thing together and helped me produce that show and get it all together so we could have John Records Landecker on the show. And as you can see a little piece of it here, John is just a wonderful performer with his band, the Legends,
That's
Landecker
right.
and the Legends, and he's just a radio host extraordinaire, and was a host when I was a kid back in the days of WLS. And,
Me too.
And AM radio being where the music was.
I feel like I'm really lucky because growing up in Chicago, my heroes were John Records Landecker and Steve and Garry, and I eventually produced both of their shows.
It's an amazing thing. How did you, first of all, going back to the very beginning, how does someone get into production? Did you go to Columbia College and take TV and radio as a major? What did you do to get into radio production to begin with?
Well, actually, I went to the University of Illinois, and I majored in Champaign and majored in advertising, which is not the usual method. But I started working at the radio station down there. I loved it. Steve and Garry came down to perform at a place called Mabel's, and I met them there. And then after I graduated, I contacted the radio station. They were at the Loop at the time, and they brought me in as an intern, and then I eventually ran their fan club.
Suite 3750?
That's correct.
On the Hancock building?
That's correct.
I remember.
They're still there, by the way.
They're still there.
And after running their fan club for a while, there was an opening at producer, and they hired me to take it over.
So you didn't do like the intern thing first with them for a long period of time?
Not really. No, it was a paid position right away. I was an intern with the Loop in their promotion department. I'd help them at live events and things like that. And I talk about that in the book, that is still the best way to get into the business, especially in a big market like Chicago. You can't really just walk in the door and get your own show. I eventually did get my own show on the Loop, but I did it through this route.
And you started out, as I remember, your show was evening music and then weekend music. You were actually hosting, rock and roll music on your regular show.
I was a disc jockey.
And it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool because, I knew your voice already, so it was like, hey, that's my friend Rick on the radio there.
That's right.
So that was
I
really
liked
cool.
it, but I found that I didn't like it as much as I enjoyed producing. Because for me, producing, I was not given really an opportunity to do a personality kind of show. And working for people like Steve and Gary and working for people like John, I would come up with ideas, present it to these guys who were these fabulous entertainers, and then they would make something unbelievable out of it. And that really made it more special for me.
You go through so many interesting experiences that you went through and teach. You learn from them and you teach here in the book. For example, one of the most fascinating parts of the book that I found was getting celebrities on the air.
Yeah.
And tell me, how did you first, you were a new producer with Steve and Gary.
Yeah.
How did you, get the knowledge and the information that you share within the book at the beginning to find these people? Because they had some big name people. They had some big rock and roll stars.
Sure.
They had, people, famous actors and actresses on their show when they were in town. Sure. How do you get these people? How do you find out where they're staying? How do you find out who their promotion person to talk to is to get them? What was the first step for you?
Well, there's a million different ways to get them, depending on who they are and where they're coming from, what they're promoting. But my first day on the job, I had no idea how to do it, and no one ever told me. As a matter of fact, the person who trained me, his name was Roman, who's become a friend of mine. Roman
Sawchuk, the famous Teenage Radiation guitar player,
great
former
guy.
Producer of Steve and Gary also.
That's exactly right. A great guy. But on my first day, kind of played a little prank on me. They asked me to get somebody on the air. It was a disc jockey somewhere in Baltimore. I forget what the guy's name was. I had no idea how to go about getting him. Roman said to me, go in and ask Steve, live on the air. They keep that sort of stuff in the studio. Not knowing that he was setting me up to get humiliated, which is exactly what happened. I walked in there, Steve stopped and goes, yes, may I help you? Yeah, do you have the number for that guy in Baltimore? No, you're the producer. You get the number. And I walked out, and ever since then, I didn't ask a lot of questions. I just kind of figured it out on my own. And they still train producers the same way. You just kind of throw them into the water and hope they don't sink. And that's why we wrote that book.
It's great. It's so cool. It's so cool. What do you think of all the experiences you had over the years, and you met so many famous people, what do you think the most amazing experience in radio production was for you?
I'm a big Beatles fan. And, I really don't get that impressed by meeting the celebrities anymore because I've met so many now over the years. But the one that blew me away was Ringo. I couldn't even speak. I was so excited. I mean, I could tell you exactly the entire conversation that I had with him, word for word. I don't want to bore everybody with it, but I can tell you the entire conversation. And I was just giddy. It was like a schoolgirl. Then the second time that happened to me was the producer of the Beatles, George Martin, was on John Landecker's show. Ringo was on with Steve and Gary. George Martin was on with Landecker, and Landecker knew about this previous incident and thought it would be funny if I interviewed George Martin myself on the air. It was a train wreck. It was terrible because I was so nervous I couldn't conduct a decent interview.
How cool. Well, I would say that those would be amazing experiences.
Those are the two that I remember the most. But all of the other people, they've been some nice people.
Sure. Tell me, at the very beginning, does a radio producer need to get an FCC license? For example, back I was in radio in high school, I started in high school. I also did radio in college. I was also a radio producer and host in college and in high school. And back then, if we wanted to produce and be on the air at the same time, we had to have an FCC license that allowed us to do that. And then things got lax over the years as things went on, that only the head producer had to have the license on. What are the rules now as far as licensing with the FCC if you want to be a producer on a major radio network?
Well, the only person that has to have one is the person that signs in and out of the log every day. I did have one. Most of the people that are in the business have them, and they're really simple to get. You just have the engineer of the radio station send in a form, and they send it back.
So you don't have to take a test anymore?
No, when I first started, and when you first started, you had to take this elaborate test. You had to know all the engineering stuff. You had to know what a frequency, the AM frequency, how that worked, the FM stuff. That just went in and out of my head. I've never used it a single day. But it has changed slightly since then. Now it's just send it in and that's it.
Very interesting. When you first started with Steve and Garry, working in the studio, was it different from what you were used to in college radio? Was the radio studio, was it more complex as far as it went, or do you feel like when you're behind the board and you know what you're doing?
It's the same. It's the same. But it was very intimidating working with Steve and Garry. I grew up listening to them, and at the time they were the #1 show in Chicago. And everybody I knew listened to the show. And so I actually learned a lot those first few years working for them, because I knew that if I screwed up, the whole city of Chicago would hear about it.
I was just going to say, everyone out there.
And, anyone who heard those years probably thinks, oh, there's that guy. But I learned from that experience. And the biggest thing I learned was to never screw up.
What about the morning show circuit? You had to get up probably, I would guess, 3:30 in the morning to be down there by probably 4:30 or 4 o'clock just to begin doing your production work so that you could go on the air at 5:30 or whatever time it was. Am I right about that?
Yeah, actually, it was even, I got up at 2:30.
2:30.
Yeah, between myself, I usually had a technical producer that worked with me. They did most of the technical stuff, and I was more of the planner of the show. I'd help come up with material for the show, the topics, booking the guests and that sort of thing. And over the years, I've done less and less of the technical work myself. But, the technical producer, that guy is in there at 2:30 in the morning. And depending on the show, they work until, 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a difficult job.
When you're doing something like that, how do you, I know you did it for years with John too. How do you have a family? You don't have a nightlife. You go to sleep. You must go to sleep at 7 o'clock at night half the time. I mean, how does life and health stay stable?
Well, health not so good. You get the bags under the eyes. You start getting a little slower.
Especially the night appearances sometimes on behalf of the host.
Yeah, you turn into a zombie. But the family thing works out pretty well for a morning show, because you get home at a decent hour. My kids were young. I've got 3 boys, and I was home, and they were home, and I got to spend a lot of time with them. So that worked out nice. I mean, granted, I was very tired all the time, but and then when the kids are teething and things like that, they're up all night. That's no big deal for a radio producer. You're up all night anyway, so you're actually very helpful to your wife.
And you see, I have 3 girls, as you know, and I never see them because here I am in the studio late at night.
Well, that's true. That's the difference.
So, taping the show. You love radio, obviously. You didn't ever go into TV at all?
No, I did work briefly with Tim Weigel when he was at Channel 2.
Of blessed memory.
Yes, a great guy, Tim. I helped him with his Weigel Wieners segment. I'd come up with the little clips that he'd intersperse in between the wacky sports clips, and I did enjoy that. But I really always felt like radio was a more creative medium, especially in those days.
You mentioned Roman Sawchuk, and people who are longtime radio listeners or Chicagoans, many know the name Roman Sawchuk. Who are some other well-known producers in Chicago whose names we might know, that you worked with or knew? And I want to talk about John Swanson now that you're going to bring him up first. John Swanson is the producer for Eric and Kathy.
That's correct.
And one of the top radio shows right now in Chicago.
It is.
And doing great. And I'm sorry he couldn't be here tonight with you. But the two of you did this together. Who else over the years that would we know their names?
Well, Jim Weiser.
Jimmy Budweiser
is a great friend of mine. He's now producer of the Spike O'Dell Show on WGN.
Right, and he used to be also, he was in TV for a while.
He was with Bob Surratt.
Bob Surratt in the morning show on Fox, and of course famous for being with
Jonathan Brandmeier.
Yeah,
and that's where John Swanson and I met each other at the Loop back in the 80s. It was a family there. That was a really exciting time to be working at the radio station. Brandmeier was on in the mornings, Kevin Matthews in the middays, Stephen Gary, Chet Kopic was on at night, Dan McNeil, who's a personality now at ESPN Radio. He was the producer of Chet Kopic's, and we had a little club, the Producers Club. And all of us are still in the business.
And I know all those names, and I'm sure many of our viewers know all those names. Over the years, you traveled on behalf of your hosts.
Yes.
And I know with John, not only did you do, with Steve too, you did live performances on the air, but with John especially, you used to go around when he'd be in concert and be with him for his shows.
Yeah.
How do you get up early in the morning? How does John do it? I never knew how he did it. But you get up early in the morning, you're producing a show all day, and then you're out at night playing until 10, 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night sometimes, a gig, and you're there with them.
Well, I made that a kind of a family affair. My wife was the stage manager on those shows, and when the kids grew up, they started coming out. And, after a while, honestly, it did become too much. And then John stopped doing the live shows. It was too much. We were just, burning the candle at both ends. But for the couple of years there, it was really fantastic. I had a lot of fun. Plus, I was younger. I was in my 30s. So it's a little different once you start getting older. I don't know how John did it. He's got an unbelievable amount of energy.
He's an amazing guy altogether. He still is. He's still with all he does. He calls himself semi-retired. He's doing stuff every day though.
He is.
When you become a radio producer and are in the business, are there classes that you take afterwards to be updated on new technology and new things coming out? How do you keep up with all the new, for example, now here in TV, we went from analog to digital in most TV studios. Some are still analog. So, we're editing tapes digitally in one studio, and in another TV studio we're editing them with analog. How about that changeover in radio? Because you're doing all this editing and drop-ins and this and that, and they must have gone from analog to digital somewhere along the way while you were in the business. How do you learn all that new stuff? Do you take classes? Is it in-house training? Do you have to work extra hours with trainers? How does that all come about?
You just learn as you go. There's no classes for that sort of thing. You start dealing with the equipment every day and you figure it out. It's another reason that we wrote this book. It's really not a very good way of working it. Producers are just kind of thrown in there. You just say, do it. Learn how to book guests, learn how to do the technical stuff, and no one ever sits you down and teaches you how to do it. You just have to go in there and figure it out on your own. And there are a couple of chapters in this book about the technical stuff and how to do the digital editing and things like that. It's really not very difficult once you get the hang of it, but in fact, I don't really even do it myself.
Really?
I've just done it a couple of times. But I wrote the chapters knowing how to do it because I had watched it a million times, and then I went and fiddled around with it, and so I do know how to do it.
So tell me about John Swanson of Eric and Kathy. John is obviously working early in the mornings. He's in a top position in the producers field with Eric and Kathy, which is one of the #1 shows. And how did you and he get together and say, let's write a book? He's working day and night. You're a little bit less right now.
Right, that's true.
Because you're not on the air full time. You're doing part-time stuff on the air.
Right.
How did you and he get together and do this book to begin with? And how did you come up with the whole concept?
Well, I was still John's producer when we came up with this a couple of years ago. And we came up with it at the same time. We both were talking about these things that we've been talking about today, about how there's no real way to train people and how difficult that is for people. And so we decided that something had to be done. And he actually had the same idea as I did, and so we decided to work on it together. And he got us a connection with the agent, and I wrote most of the book myself, and the two of us put the outlines together, and that's how it happened. And we've known each other for years. Like I said, we're a little club. I mean, we were competitors at the time, but we're not really competitors because producers, we all know each other. We help each other out wherever we can.
Who would you say, of the classic radio people, who would you say, outside of John, because I know you love John and he's a sweetheart, you know, he's such a nice guy. I myself have never dealt with anybody in show business like a John Records Landecker. He is just such a kind guy. You know, he never turns anyone away when they come for an autograph.
Well, that's
he never says, I don't have time for you now. I mean, I've seen him. I've been with him and hung out with him many times when you just see him just being just the nice guy that he is. He's real front and behind. Who would you say is really some of the sweetest guys on radio that you know, kind of like John, that people know, but they wouldn't know that they're the same on the air when they sound so nice, or maybe don't sound so nice as they are in person?
Well, Bob Surratt is a good example. I mean, he's not in radio anymore. He's on television, but he was gracious enough to have us on his show to talk about this book.
Chicago Tonight.
On Chicago Tonight. And he's actually a really nice guy. Every time I see him, he comes over and talks to me. Fred Winston is another great guy. He's on the oldie station now.
And he's a contemporary of John back from the AM days of rock and roll.
Dick Biondi, great guy.
Now, there's someone I have never met, would love to have on the show, Dick Biondi.
Dick Biondi is a firecracker. He's got more energy than John Landecker does. I don't know how he does it. I don't know how old he is. That's a well-guarded secret. But he's a great guy.
He was on the air when my parents were kids.
Well, that's probably true. That's probably true. Those are just a couple examples. You know, the guys that were at the Loop, Brand Meier, I always got along great with. Kevin Matthews. Kevin Matthews and I started on the Loop on the same day and have developed a friendship over the years. So, you know, really most of them are nice guys.
And they've all been nice to me.
And Steve Garry, obviously, too. Yeah.
Well, I've been on Steve Garry's show. I've been on Kevin's show. So I've been with all of them, too. Everybody's always been real nice to me. But, you know, you always wonder, are they as nice on the air because that's their job as they are in person? So it's good to hear. And Brand Meier, as a matter of fact, my very first radio show, my very first call-in was with Buzz Kilman and Brand Meier.
Oh, really?
It was with Buzz Kilman and Brand Meier. We were talking about, they were asking me about the origin of a yarmulke.
Oh, really?
So Brand Meier was making fun of Buzz Kilman at the time because he didn't pronounce it correctly.
Well, you're the go-to guy when we're looking for rabbis. It's a well-known fact in Chicago radio.
Well, you know what's great? I meet people on the street and somebody says, you know, somebody hears someone say Rabbi Doug or address me as Rabbi Doug, and they'll say to me, are you Rabbi Doug from Brand Meier or from Steve Dahl?
Yeah.
And they've never even seen my TV show because they don't have cable TV.
Right, exactly.
But they know me from the radio, so that it is an amazing thing how so many people over the years, that all these guys who were so nice to me and had me on their show, and I still love when I get called to go on the show. Pete McMurray, one of my favorite people who had me on the radio with him so many times over the years, and Dr. Kelly, you know, has had me on a number of times. I love doing it, and they're all so nice. What do you think in giving a clue to someone in school now, possibly, I say Columbia because it's in Chicago,
right.
Going into TV and radio, what do you think their next move would be if they are really interested in taking their place in Chicago major radio stations?
Well, there's two routes. One is you go to a smaller market, you learn, you know, the whole system of how everything works. And the other route is the route I took, which was to get an internship and learn from within at a major market. Now, I was not willing to move out of Chicago because this is where my home is, this is where my family is, and I would have, at that point, chosen another career rather than move. But some people like the adventure of it. They like moving from various different locations, and I have friends that have done it that route, and they really enjoyed it. You go to smaller places like Rockford or, you know, Madison, Wisconsin is a great market. You know, I did work in Champaign for a while, so I kind of got a small taste of that with college radio. And if you can work at a college radio station or college television station, I highly recommend it because you learn so much there.
Yeah, I did.
And it's not something that you get credit for necessarily, but that is highly sought after by the people running radio stations.
Looking for someone who has experience.
Absolutely. So because they don't teach you anything, they just kind of throw you in. Now, if you already know, that puts you a leg up on everybody else.
Well, as our time runs down, The Radio Producer's Handbook by Rick Kaempfer and John Swanson is just an amazing book. Rick, what would you say is the most important chapter in this book for someone going into the business to read?
There's a chapter in there, I think it's chapter 10, that is a day in the life of a producer. And it takes you from the moment the producer shows up until the moment the show is over. And it kind of gives you a feel for a show in action, what happens, the various different things that can go wrong, and how the producer is involved in every step of the way, and what he has to do in order to make the show successful. That when I've talked to people, they say that's the chapter that means the most to them.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. Thank God I've had all these people on my show, Bob Surratt, Steve Dahl, Garry Meier, John Records Landecker, because everybody gets to see them by the clips that we're playing today. I want to thank you, Rick Kaempfer, radio producer extraordinaire, good friend of mine, amazing author, along with John Swanson, of the Radio Producer's Handbook. And I want to thank all of you, my guests who are here every week to watch us here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Check out our website, tvrabbi.com, which has all the information about our show. And thanks again to Rick Kaempfer, and thanks to you, and hope to see you next time right here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom.
Landecker, the legends would like to salute that great phenomenon known as Titanic. By performing for you now the great Celine Dion song that we've heard so many times. In May of 1941, just begun. Wait a minute! That's not Titanic! That's Sink the Bismarck! It's April 1998. I'm sitting in my chair. I turned on the baseball game. My wife says, don't you dare. You never take me anywhere. Tonight we're gonna go. We're gonna see Titanic with that kid DiCaprio. I paid a fortune for the seats for my wife and me. The theater was really packed. We got the last two seats. It wasn't very comfortable. The floors to pull my feet. You know, it's pretty cold in here. What happened to the heat? I went to see Titanic cause my wife made me go. But she didn't say it was a 3-hour show. I had a great big jumbo coke sitting at my seat. Before the ship began to sink, I really had to pee. Oh, brother. My wife said we couldn't leave until the film was done. I looked around and saw we weren't the only ones. I thought I'd really like this film. I'd like James Cameron. But Schwarzenegger's not in it. It's not as fun. I don't care that old lady in the redhead didn't win. DiCaprio not nominated ain't no big thing. The teenage girls in front of me are screaming for Leo. Why didn't I wait for this film on video? I went to see Titanic cause my wife made me go. But she didn't say it was a 3-hour show. I had a great big chunk of coke sitting at my seat. Before the ship began to sink, I really had to pee. Iceberg, right ahead! Finally, there's an iceberg, at least the ship can sink. The movie must be over soon, at least that's what you think. I leaned over to the wife, gave her a tired sigh. Got some news for you, honey. They're all gonna die. She shot me a dirty look. I was swarming in my chair, and every scene had tons of water screaming everywhere. My bladder hurt so much I thought I'd pass it in my seat. I'm waiting for the credits to finally get relief. I went to see Titanic cause my